morning and welcome to Searching the Heart. Happy to be here at the office on this very episode. And today I'll be discussing something very interesting vis-a-vis the recent events in world politics, where we see leaders of the world come together and form blocs, and there is an emerging new world order. And this new world order is peculiar, I may say, as in we've never seen this before. There is never before has this kind of situation been where the West is not really the West as it used to be. And of course, we've always said that the global South has always been a shaky kind of alliance, but something interesting happened just this week, coming into this week, and Xi Jinping, the leader of China, was able to bring a host of global leaders under his canopy, celebrating his country, the achievements of his country, especially militarily. Okay, so and technologically also. So this is a wonderful thing. We have always talked about where China is going, how China is growing and becoming a world power, has always been a world power anyway, but in a new way, in the area of technology, and driving certain forms of progress all over the world. And I have never come really to be a fan of China myself. And the reason is because I have never been a fan of communism. Okay, it's just me. That is my preference. I don't like communism. But I will always tell you, I'm that kind of person. If I see you doing the right thing, I'll tell you you're doing the right thing. Okay, no matter how much we disagree. Okay, so this is just the thing. But I've never been a fan of communism. But recently I have been able to kind of shift my gaze and look at what China is doing and see that China is becoming something. In fact, China is the new Japan. In the 80s, Japan was, that world power that we would say, okay, was into so many wonderful things, especially in the area of technology. But China is taking over. And maybe it's because of their shared history. Of course, they are one people. We all know that. Okay? So China is taking over that role that Japan used to play and is really moving the world in the area of discovering of new technology, pushing the boundaries of science and all that. And even in business, okay? So this is just despite their weakness, which is communism. So we'll look at that and maybe try to look at why this is so. But today I really want to focus on a topic that is of much importance. And this topic is the parochial mind of tyranny. The parochial mind of tyranny, if you may. Looking at where the world has come in how tyranny as a concept is patronized, is understood, and how the world will react to such a concept. Okay, and I believe that we need to consider this, the source of tyranny, very important. And when we know the source of tyranny, what sustains it, we will know how. Is it good? We have to consider that. Is it good or is it bad? Okay, and then we'll be able to say where we want to go in terms of how we treat or we look at people who indulge in that form of governance. Okay, so China is a very important aspect of all this, and we'll be looking at China's role after this short break. So the rise of China. Okay, China has been really moving very fast for the past 75 or so years. since the end of the Second World War. I remember many, when you research, you will find that China was a very poor country. Even at the end of the Second World War, though it was a very large country, and so contributed a lot to the defeat of Japan and Germany, and the alliances between Japan and Germany, of course, and Mussolini during the Second World War. Okay, so this was a very important part that China played, but on the general sense, China was a poor country. Okay, and technologically also was a developing country. Okay, from all indications, though it was of course on the heels of Japan because of its large population, was a relatively developing country. But because of its size and its influence that created its influence, at that time it was considered a world power, and of course included in the UN Security Council, and that began the rise of China. Okay. So how did this happen? Let's look at a little at the history of China. China has always been a country that would tend to develop, okay, because of its sense of originality, its sense of identity, okay, uniqueness in the global scheme of things. It is understood that China was, as under the Huns, the tribal group called Huns, okay, was part of the Roman Empire. A little part of China was part of the Roman Empire for quite a while, and facilitated the Silk Road, what is known as the Silk Road. The Romans traded in silk, and they got, of course, we know where silk comes from. Okay, so for quite a while was part of the Roman Empire, but at a point, of course, created its own empire. Okay, and that is how the wall of the Great Wall of China was built, and of course got a name for itself. And for a very long time, of course, after the fall of the Roman Empire, China was virtually cut off from the rest of the world, because of course, with every fall of every empire, as is happening, similar to what is happening right now, every enclave, every powerful or influential enclave wants to maintain its own influence within its own borders, and because of that, they begin to, create the boundaries, segregate themselves, indulge in some form of protectionism, and this is what happened at the fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire created what we know as the British Empire, created the French Empire, okay, and of course the Chinese Empire. Okay, so these are the truths that we know. Although in present time, of course, China would want to create, to rewrite that history, because of course it is debatable how far the influence of the Roman Empire went within the Chinese enclaves, but this is known to be a fact. Okay, so this is what happened, and of course these are people who have a very rich history, known as the Mongols. Okay, in some cases they are known as the Huns. Okay, and are very well known for their Buddhist, the popularization of the Buddhist religion. Okay, but how and this is what makes them unique. Okay, the Buddhist tradition is that unique tradition that is responsible for whatever the Chinese have, and who they are, their identity, their technology, everything they are. is from the Buddhist tradition. Okay, of course, we know the Buddhists also claim to be related to the Hindu culture. Okay, and it is said that it is a Hindu. Buddha was probably a Hindu. Okay, that left India and went to China, and there instituted the religion. Okay, so there's that myth that goes along with the history of that region. Okay, so Buddhism is everything to the Chinese. Okay, it determines everything they do, and for you to understand who the Chinese are, you have to understand Buddhism. Okay, and this is how you will know, you will understand how they become who they have become and why and where they're going. Okay, we'll continue also after this short break. What is Buddhism and how does it control the Chinese identity and culture? Okay, now Buddhism is classified under a common form of religions, and these religions are called theistic humanisms. Okay, theistic humanisms. But it is quite debatable whether Buddhism itself is a form of theistic humanism. Some people may want to categorize it more in the form of atheistic humanism. Okay, but of course it's very difficult to do that because Buddhism has a theistic thrust in the sense that it believes in the existence of the spirit realm, and believes that human beings can only grow and prosper themselves and become who they should be through engaging with the spirit realm. Okay, although the concept of God himself or one God is very, very rare in Buddhism and vague in Buddhism, but it is there. It is there hidden within Buddhism, as is also in Hinduism. And we know that these two religions have a common source. Okay, so as different from Hinduism, and what is Hinduism? Hinduism is just traditional religion, very similar to African traditional religion. Okay, a form of folk religion, polytheistic religion that believes in mysticism, believes in achieving your higher consciousness, engaging with the spirit realm in order to profit the physical realm. And however it does that, does not matter because of that polytheistic environment it operates. Okay, and so this is Hinduism, but in a general sense, it is more complicated than that. But from there, Buddhism, develops its own unique forms in that it is less firm about the gods and is more sympathetic towards the human condition. Okay, this is the difference between Hinduism and Buddhism. Okay, Buddhism believes that human beings can achieve, should concentrate more on achieving their higher consciousness, and whatever they do in terms of spiritual understanding and knowledge is for the improvement of the physical man. Okay, of the human mind and the human life on earth in general. Okay, and of course working all the way for the sake of life after death. Okay, so this is just the whole thing. So that is just that very thin difference between Buddhism and Hinduism that just makes that difference, that creates this huge gap between them. Okay, and from there we will see how Buddhism has created the China that we see today. Okay, and of course we know the very popular relationship between China and Japan. Okay, and for a while within the history of China, the Japanese dominated China politically, okay, and militarily. Okay, though Japan was small because they are intrinsically the same people, ethnically and racially. Okay, so the Japanese dominated China for quite a while, and we know that, of course, the only religion that the Japanese have is Shintoism, and Shintoism is all about the emperor. Okay, so you see that influence. It's not about God, it's about the emperor. Just like the Romans worshipped only the emperor. Okay, although they had a multiplicity of gods that were personal gods to whoever was within the Roman Empire, but they only worshipped the emperor. The emperor was supreme in everything, and this is the same thing we see in Japan, okay, under Shintoism. And this is the same influence that influences whatever you see in Japan today, that is less theistic and more humanistic. Okay, there's that emphasis on the human being, on the community, on the nation of China. Okay, so this is the issue. Now, this is the difference, and this is what has really influenced China and made China what it is today. Okay, so but Buddhism is still a form of traditionalism. And what is traditionalism? Okay, today the word traditionalism is actually a compound word. Okay, traditionalism is often used to refer to any culture that is kind of ancient or archaic, okay, that still depends on pre-modern human philosophies, to govern its structure, its governance, and its theology. Okay, generally that is what traditionalism is, but traditionalism sometimes is adopted in even liberal forms to talk of something that is just old. Okay, something that is just old. When something is old, we say it's traditional. When we're used to doing something a particular way, we say it's traditional. Okay, but traditionalism, in this podcast, I'll be talking about traditionalism to refer to the theological foundations. Okay, and these theological foundations we're talking about are very, very strict foundations. We'll look at more about this after this short break. So what are the hallmarks of traditionalism as a theological system, as a social system? Okay, what are the hallmarks of traditionalism? And one of the very important characteristics of traditionalism is that it wants to control. Okay, it seeks to control. It seeks to control everything. It seeks to make sure there's a form of uniformity in what everybody is doing, and to maintain authority, a particular form of authority. Now, the problem that we often get into in describing, because we tend to just describe traditionalism as something that is old, is that we think that traditionalism is always conservative. That is the problem. And this is the problem that we of the 21st century must escape. Okay, we're having problems, and especially in the relationship between the United States and other parts of the world, okay, Europe and other parts of the world, and of course in Christianity. We tend to think that traditionalism is always conservative. No, there's a lot of liberal philosophy, liberal theology, liberal social activities within traditionalism, and that is why it is so powerful. Okay, that is why it has become so powerful, and that is the reason we see Hinduism becoming very powerful, African traditional religion becoming so very powerful, and of course Buddhism becoming very powerful. But Buddhism is peculiar, and that is what it has marked it out. And we're going to take time to look at why Buddhism is peculiar and is leading to the rise of the nation of China. Okay, probably contributed to the rise of Japan, made Japan what it was and what it still is, and is making China what it is today. Okay, so it is a form of traditionalism, but a peculiar form of traditionalism. Okay, that is less firm about the concept of God and more sympathetic to the human needs. Okay, and especially the human need to achieve human destiny in terms of human preponderance and human rule of the human territory, which is the planet Earth. Okay, so this is the sympathy that Buddhism has for humanism, for human beings, and has made it what it is, and created the nationalist China of the World War II, created the China we see, the communist China that we see today. Okay, and probably created the China of the days of the Genghis Khan and the Ming Dynasty. Okay, so this is what we see. These are people who believe in themselves, first of all, as human beings. And this is a tenet of Buddhism, that you can achieve higher consciousness. The main aim of a human being on earth is to achieve a greater consciousness. Okay? To improve himself spiritually, and improving himself spiritually is improving himself in his entirety. Okay, intellectually, morally, financially, of course, and we see that very distinct theology when it comes to finances. If finances will make you to come short of your goals, your spiritual goals, then you let go of that. And of course, that is found in Buddhism and Hinduism too. Okay, and for the sake of a greater prosperity. But the difference between the forms found in the Buddhist theology and the forms found in the Hindu theology is that the Buddhist theology has a way of emphasizing the physical world, while the Hindu theology does not. Okay, in Hindu theology, you do everything and anything just to achieve that spiritual consciousness, and there's that emphasis on these polytheistic gods. But in the Buddhist theology, the emphasis is on the human condition. Okay, although you do everything also, but the emphasis, because of that unique emphasis on the human condition, the human being is preserved at the end. But in Hinduism, the human being can be totally destroyed to the very end, okay? Just to achieve that consciousness, higher consciousness. But Buddhism kind of sympathizes with the human condition, and wants the ultimate aim is to better the human condition. I'm not a Buddhist. I want to interject here a bit. I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm just trying to help you to understand the China that we see today, and what makes China what it is today. And hopefully we'll come to really discover our topic, which is the parochial mind of tyranny. Okay, to understand the parochial mind of tyranny. So this is what we see in the Buddhist tradition and the Buddhist culture. Okay, and so having talked about that, and knowing that traditionalism is not always conservative, but is also very liberal in many forms when it comes to sexual activities, when it comes to finances, when it comes to social interactions. Traditionalism can be very, very liberal. Okay, and this is a mistake Christians make, modern human beings make, and they think that traditionalism is all about being conservative, and it's not so. It can share both values in the same space, being conservative and being very liberal in the same space. Okay, and this is what the mistake that many missionaries make when they enter primitive societies that refuse to accept modernism. They think it's all about the first things they see. They come across with people who are very, very protective, okay, of themselves, and immediately that guard falls, they allow them into the culture, and the missionary or the explorer thinks, okay, now I can relax. But he comes close to the woman of the primitive man, and he gets shot. And so many missionaries have lost their lives, in that situation, okay, because they have misread the intentions of, the traditionalists, okay. So this is the problem. He can be very, very conservative and at the same time be very liberal, and you need to understand his philosophy. That and this is from the philosophy that he is a theistic humanist. And what is the definition of a theistic humanist? The definition of a theistic humanist is that he still elevates himself, the human being, as the person who determines who God is. He is not fully submitted to God's authority. God only is a tool for his own survival, for his own success. And this is the theistic humanist. Okay? So that is why traditionalism tends to have these two things together. Liberalism and conservatism, and you need to be very, very attentive to understand it. So what it does is that it loves to pick and choose, okay? The traditionalist picks and chooses what fits, what suits him at whatever time it suits him. So God is only there for his own progress, okay? If God does not do anything for his own good, forget about God, okay? So this is just who the traditionalist is, okay? Although yes, he tends to favor God in most cases because of the fear of losing control, and because he sees the gods as the source of him maintaining that control. So this is where his weakness is, and the gods dominate the religion, okay, and especially the African form, okay. And so this is wrong. But in the Chinese form, he has found a way of making the human being more the master of himself, okay? And because he's the master of himself, science progresses in the Buddhist culture and does not progress in the African culture, okay? Because in the African culture, the human being is not at the helm of things, okay? The human condition is not the issue. The issue is how, first of all, control, then he uses the gods to assert that control. But in Buddhism, the first thing is not control. The first thing is how can I improve myself? And in the aim of trying to improve myself, then I seek ways of improving myself. If the answer is with the gods, fine. If it's not with the gods, if it's in myself, great. So this is the major difference. Now I've gone to compare African traditionalism with Buddhism as against Hinduism. Hinduism is somehow in the middle of African traditionalism and Buddhist traditionalism, okay? Hinduism is there in the middle. So this is the difference. While African traditionalism is all about, control, Buddhist traditionalism is all about improvement. This is the difference. We will talk more about this after this short break.
Discover a transformative journey into the kingdom of heaven. Following the initial publication, the author dives deeper with 2 insightful follow-up books. Ever felt disconnected from God even in worship? Explore how God's unconventional ways can transform your life. How can you align with divine plans, avoiding distractions? Find answers in The Kingdom of Heaven on Earth and The 3, Illuminating Christian Truths and Prophetic Practices. Unlock profound insights guiding you toward a deeper connection with God. Don't miss out. Dive into this enlightening exploration today. Click the link on the caption to get your copy.
So yes, now as to the peculiarity between Buddhism and African traditionalism, we said that African traditionalism desires control, And of course, control is the control is actually the source of tyranny, okay? And that is why Africans tend to be behind in the developmental process of this world, because too many people, and it's peculiar really, it's the same thing in China. The Chinese always want control, but as opposed to Africa, the Chinese are able to submit to one, from a very long time, because of this Buddhist culture of emphasizing self-improvement instead of just control. They've been able to submit to one governing system, and of course one leader, okay? But in Africa, it's not so. There's too many people who want control, okay? Every little village chief wants to control his domain, as opposed to that other one, or that other one, okay? So this is the difference. And this is what has created the China that we have today. From a very long time, that emphasis on improving human society, improving human consciousness, improving everything that has to do with a human being through achieving that higher self, higher spiritual self, has created, okay, what the Chinese have today. But of course, in the African forms, is about how I can control my little enclave and how I can, rule that small enclave, and that is just that. It stops there. And so, of course, emphasizing the polytheistic forms, and of course, the same thing is in India. Of course, India, like I said, is in the middle between the Chinese forms of Buddhism and traditionalism found in Africa. Now, where does Christianity come in all this? Okay, and this is what makes Christianity very, very peculiar. Okay, Christianity doesn't care about all these things. All these things I've talked about, Christianity doesn't care about them. Christianity is one of the only, if not the only, theistic religion, okay, that focuses everything on God. Okay, it focuses everything on God. It has nothing to do with human beings. But through God, now human beings are defined and actualized. Okay, so this is what Christianity is all about. And Christianity also may be seen as a balance of theology. Okay, it balances these theologies, but peculiarly is able to define goodness and sinfulness. Okay, it defines goodness and evil, which is sinfulness. Okay, in Buddhism, there is no real definition of evil. Okay, evil exists in the universe as something that is generic to existence itself. Okay, and of course is part of the world. Okay, and in dealing with it, it is less, in Buddhism it is less firm on the concept of sin as Christianity is. Christianity focuses on sin and says sin is evil, sin is bad, God hates sin, and so we should not indulge it. But Buddhism sees evil as part of the world, okay, and handles it more with a bit more carefully, handles it more with a kind of balance in mind. And that is why when you talk about the balance of theology, many people mistake what you're talking about with Buddhism, okay? Because Buddhism is that religion that really emphasizes the balance of life, okay? The yin and the yang, okay? So this is the thing. So the difference between Christianity and Buddhism is that Christianity is firm about what sin is, but Buddhism is not, okay? Buddhism is less firm about that. It recognizes evil and says evil is bad, but it's less firm about what the definitions of evil are and what sin is. Okay, so this is just the difference. Okay, So this is what we see. Christianity emphasizes God, okay, and emphasizes God's will for human beings, and of course what God comes to do. That is why some Chinese theologians who try to talk about Christianity see Christ as the Buddha, okay, as an exemplification of who Buddha is, because Buddhism kind of congregates around Buddha, okay? So they see Christ as a Buddha, because Christianity is all about Christ, it's all about Jesus Christ, okay? So this is what we see in Buddhism as compared to Christianity, okay? And so, but in Buddhism, of course, certain differences in Buddhism and Christianity. Buddhism believes in reincarnation, and through reincarnation, of course, the human being can continue to indulge in this self-improvement until he reaches his most acceptable form spiritually, the highest consciousness, okay? And while in Christianity it is appointed for a man to die, and after death, judgment, okay? So God judges the human being after he dies and determines what the human being becomes, okay? So this is what we see in Christianity as different from Buddhism. And of course we know that Judaism shares also the very source of Christianity itself, shares some commonalities with those religions like Buddhism, okay, and Hinduism. So this is what we see happening, and this is the reason China is what it is today, because of these shared tenets. Even though the Western world has gone very far, China, there is little that the Western world can actually give to China, okay? There's very little, except for trade, for instance, okay? There's very little, but there's very little. Theologically, there are many shared commonalities, okay? And of course, I've already mentioned why China is at the head, because of that emphasis on trying to fix the human condition rather than just, control, okay? So this is the thing. And of course, Buddhism does not just pick and choose what is good and what is evil. Buddhism emphasizes the human condition. And so anything that is bad for the human condition is bad. And that is one of the similarities between Buddhism and Christianity. Okay, what is bad is bad. Okay, we are still on the topic of the parochial mind of tyranny, okay? The parochial mind of tyranny. Now, I want to still go back and talk about why I am talking about this, okay? I mentioned in a podcast some time ago that somehow the global south seems to be the aggressor in global politics, Of course, it is not popularly seen that way, because there's so much sympathy for the global south recently within the past, maybe because of the rising population, of course, of the global south as compared to the global north, possibly. Within the UN, within general, even within the West itself, okay, which is the global north, there's a lot of sympathy for the global south, for principles, held to by the global south. And so, that is what has been. But in my view, when you look at the topic of tyranny, the countries that most likely will practice tyranny are in the global south. Of course, the countries that will not allow freedom of speech are in the global south. The countries where more of the wars are taking place are in the global south. Okay, so this is a problem, and that is why I have said that the global south is, seemingly the aggressor, okay, in many of the things, even though it has a lot of sympathizers, okay, globally. Okay, so this is why I want to talk about this issue of tyranny, okay, as the face of evil, as it were, of this century. Why is it that tyranny is the face of evil of this century, and yet there's so much sympathy for the global south? And so there's so much sympathy for the global south, and yet there's a lot of tyranny, okay, in the global south. And so we tend to ask ourselves why. Why is this so? And maybe this is what is churning some of the sympathies in the West for tyranny. Okay, we saw what happened just recently, and in fact the rise of left extreme parties all over in Europe, especially in the United Kingdom. Some sentiments there. Of course, the United States has been an issue. The United States is only a two-party system, mostly. Okay, and so they have been struggling with their issues. Of course, like I said, Trump himself is a little more disciplined in this time around. Okay, because of course he's an American, and Americans are liberal. Okay, and what affected him during his first tenure was that he had a lot of sympathies for liberalism. And in my view, I said it on social media, I said he probably lost the presidency because of that, in that first tenure. Okay, because he had so much sympathy for liberalism, and he didn't know where to peg his sympathies for liberalism. And this is what has changed from the Trump we knew then, from the Trump we can see today. And the Trump we see today, he has fixed that problem, okay? The problem he had the first time, he didn't know how to peg his sympathies or where to put a stop to his sympathies for liberalism. And this is what affected, is better off now in this tenure. So, this is what we see. Those problems that we see in the traditional system are affecting the global system right now. Okay, what we see in the West, going on in the West, is that, of course, the struggles or the crisis going on in the West is to be able to really find out why there are sympathies for the South, while the South seems to be the aggressor. Other issues are that maybe there's something that the West is doing wrong. Okay, of course, we have traced before global historical global trends. Of course, the pressure surrounding Africa as a continent that has created the kind of disadvantaged situation of Africa today. Of course, some of the problems with the West, and the West actually accepted this, and of course put a stop to colonialism, and of course is still trying to ameliorate for some of those problems through aid and all that, and it is these discussions that have created the world that we see today. Okay, so this is the problem here. So after saying this, I want to quickly round up by talking about the issues as concerns traditionalism. Okay, one thing about traditionalism is that traditionalism has a lot of builds the foundation of the prosperity that we find in traditional systems around population, but at the same time does not really value human life. Okay, that's why we see the preponderance of tyranny within traditional systems. Okay, and this is a kind of a paradox or an irony. Okay, the value for human life, value for population, and at the same time very little respect for human life, and human existence. So we see those two things still working hand in hand within the traditional system, and this is one of the failures of the traditional system. And in my view, of course, this is what will bring this is the undoing of China, or what we see in China. Very high population. It was at one time the most populous country in the world, and now is number 2 to India. We know why that is, okay? But and depends a lot on trade, okay, with other nations. And I believe that this is what may bring China down as a global power, okay? And the second problem with traditionalism is that it kind of puts a limit to intellectual concerns vis-a-vis maturity. This is the problem with traditionalism, okay? It is not too concerned, especially the African form of traditionalism. It's not very concerned about intellectual concerns, human maturity, individual maturity, okay? Like I said, control is the whole issue. And this is the strong point of the Chinese form of traditionalism expressed in Buddhism, okay? It is more concerned about the human condition, okay? It emphasizes improvement of the human condition at the expense of control. Although there is there is also a lot of emphasis on control, but human condition is put first, okay? So this is the problem with traditionalism. A lot of traditionalism is not very concerned. It puts a limit on intellectual concerns vis-a-vis human maturity. Okay, and these are the things that China has been able to kind of find a balance to, and has been able to lead in the global south. Okay. And it was vis-a-vis these developments that Asia as a continent was discovered in the 80s through into the 90s, and became the hub of manufacturing, the hub of trade globally. A lot of American companies shifted and their factories to Asia, and this is one of the issues. This is what created the China that we see today. Okay, so China has been able to lead because of this shift, and from Indonesia, from Hong Kong, a lot of these companies have moved into China, and that is how China has become the global power, technology-wise, as we see today. Okay, and I believe that China can succeed if it solves some of these problems that we have already mentioned. The problem of the balance between population and human life, okay, the overdependence on trade. Christian civilization understands that human life is the most valuable thing in the Christian civilization, yet it tries to protect human life through allowing technology to prosper, and making less emphasis on population, but more emphasis on the quality of life. And of course, there are people who see that as a disadvantage, but I don't see that. I've always made it clear that I don't see that as a disadvantage. I see the emphasis of Western culture on technology as a great advantage, and this is the disadvantage that China may have, that may lead to the fall of China. Because China is investing so much in technology and at the same time investing a lot in population, and because of the dependence on trade, this may affect China. So these are the weaknesses of traditionalism as a system that tends to promote tyranny. Okay, tends to promote tyranny. So where do we go? Hence the leadership of China. Yes, hence the leadership of China. China has naturally evolved into the leader in these times, okay, because of the emphasis of Buddhism on personal improvement, the emphasis on the human condition, okay, far more than any other culture in the world, I must say. And that is why a lot of atheists, because atheists share that same are concerned, and so they sympathize a lot with Buddhist religions. That's why the New Age movement, which is mostly a Buddhist movement, thrived in the United States in the 70s into the 80s, and is at the forefront of that inroad into Christianity, as we see. Okay, so this is how China has become what it has become, because China first, through the New Age movement, became very powerful in the United States, and was able to be accepted by the atheists, the movement of atheists in the Western world, and that is why it became so dominant. And that's the reason why the technology, development of technology, has all but shifted right to China and into Asia. Okay, so Asia was discovered in the late 80s into the 90s. Okay, Asia was discovered, and Asia and the growth of Asia, even the lesser countries of Asia like Indonesia, Hong Kong, Taiwan, even was as a place where the Westerners patronized, aided the growth of China. Okay, and that is why China is interested in Hong Kong, has taken over Hong Kong, and now is interested in Taiwan. Okay, because it was through those places that China became powerful. Okay, these were the roads China was able to access, modern technology. Even though, and because China has a lot of claim on modern technology itself. Okay, it was a natural evolution. Okay, China has a very, very powerful claim on modern technology. As the source of the formula for gunpowder, and so many, the source of the formula for modern money, paper money, okay, and many other forms. Okay, so China has a lot of claim on modern civilization, and that is why China has taken over as the leader in Asia. And of course, because of that foundational emphasis on the human condition that we find in Buddhism, it is very possible that China will go very far. The only thing that will stop China, in my view, is tyranny again. Okay, tyranny might stop China, but will it? We're not very sure, because there's some sympathy coming up in the Western world for tyranny as a concept, and so we're not sure. We're still watching. But if anything will destroy China, it will be tyranny. And of course, some economic analysts have said that China's dependence on trade vis-a-vis the very large population it has, of course, is one of those things that will destroy China. And those are some of the issues with the traditionalism. Okay, very little regard for human life, but depends a lot on population. The strength of the West is that the West depends a lot on technology. Okay, but China combines both, a lot of technology and a lot of population. So it is said that this is what will bring down China, because China still depends a lot on Africa, still depends a lot on the West, and Africa is shared by China and the United States, in terms of trading partnerships, and so this is the problem. Okay, so what will bring down China will be, those weaknesses of traditionalism. Okay, and maybe it might not be tyranny, it might be the issue of population. Okay, and in my view, actually, because this is what, and I always disagree with a lot of people who have very positive views about population. But I believe that population may bring down China, okay, because population is very dependent on trade, and when the trade is cut off. I am David Ntuchenke for you today in Searching the Heart.